Hello and welcome to Chat with Mac. And this is our first podcast, first of many, hopefully. My name is Minty Macliver, and this is my dad, Kevin Macliver, founder and inventor of Multimac, the multiple child car seat. So we make the Multimac. For anyone with more than two children, you will know that you cannot fit more than two child seats on the back seat of the majority of cars. Forcing a lot of families to buy bigger cars, 7-seaters, where you have to have a child in the boot, aka the crumple zone, which isn't safe. You've lost your boot space. You're driving a car you often don't like as much, is less economical, more expensive, so on and so forth. So the Multimac sits on top of your back seat, as you can safely fit 3 or 4 children from 0 to 12 and beyond in the back seat of any car. We can fit 4-seater into the back of a Golf. So parents do not have to compromise on safety once child number 3 or 4 comes along. So that's a bit about us and what we do. And today's podcast is the subject is, why has it taken us so long to bring out our extended rear-facing seat? So babies, in fact, Dad, you tell us a bit about the rules as they were and what they are at the moment in terms of children sat rear-facing in child seats.
Okay, when we first started the Multimac, which was in 1995, when Macliver child number 4 came along, the rules were that children had to sit rear-facing until they were either 9 months old or 9 kilograms.
And was that EC 4404 or was that 03?
Right. Actually, you're right. It was 03.
Yeah.
It was 03. And then that continued in the EC 4404. And then we subsequently moved to R129, which is the current legislation. And in that, the child has to be rear-facing up to 15 months and
82 centimetres.
82 centimetres, that's right. And the reason for it is simply that an adult, is safer in a crash if you're facing backwards. And the reason for that is if you have a crash and you are sitting in a seat, then you're pressed into the seat, so you support it across the full length of your body. And obviously that's not pleasant, but it's relatively safe. If you have a forward-facing crash, you tend to move forward in your seat and you're constrained by the seatbelts, so you might get a bit of bruising. But also the head, which is like a big mass, is just supported on your neck, so that will tend to move far further forward than your body, which is constrained by the seatbelts. And particularly if you look at children, young children, they tend to have a disproportionately big head and thin neck.
I think their head is 25% of their overall body weight, isn't it? Which is huge.
Indeed. And so for young children, a forward-facing crash is very traumatic and can break their neck. And the younger you are, then the more disproportionate is that ratio of strength to the mass of your head, which is why rear-facing was introduced.
So, Dad, when you get on a train, do you always sit facing backwards?
Well, funnily enough, I feel travel sick, so I don't, but
so
I know I
safety
should.
goes out the window. I try to sit for rear-facing, but when you want to look out the window, it's really hard just seeing everything pass you by and like you've missed it all. So, yeah, it's a difficult one, but I do always feel I should sit rear-facing because of
Fortunately, we don't give our children that choice.
No, exactly. Okay, so we've obviously got a rear-facing seat at the moment, the Minimac, and that currently takes babies from birth up until about 18 months. We have actually had many customers say, I've kept my baby in here and they're 2 years old. They've been in the Minimac till 2 and beyond. It's all a matter of size, really. And also a lot of parents, I think their legs are getting a bit squashed now. I'm going to move them forward facing. But actually, it's irrelevant. Although an adult may be a bit squashed, sat with their legs, with their knees bent. Kids never complain about it, do they? And they're a lot more flexible than us adults. So they are happy to sit with their legs a bit bent up. The most important thing when it comes to rear facing is that their head is still encased within the back of the seat. So really, we always say, keep them in the Minimac as long as you possibly can. And as soon as their head starts growing above the top of the seat, that's when they're too big for it. That's when you should turn them round forward facing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
So we actually developed an extended rear facing. So an extended rear facing basically is a child seat which will take them further than normally to about 4 years old. And certainly our extended rear facing will take children up to 4 years old. We designed it, how many years ago now did we actually design the Minimac ERF?
Well, on the way here, it suddenly struck me that when we developed the first Minimac and approved that with an 18-month-old, we actually put a 3-year-old in it then, and that was in 2006, which is 20 years ago.
Wow.
So, but we thought no more of it really, because there wasn't the great emphasis on rear facing as there is today.
And also the dummy would have been quite squashed.
Oh yeah, the dummy was kind of like this.
Yeah.
What was interesting for us is that the unlike most rear-facing seats, which have some support leg or some such, the Multimac is secured in the car completely, and then the Minimac clips in and kind of overhangs, looks like it's cantilevered. So it probably looks like it needs more support, but in fact we know from the crash test that it doesn't. And the fact that it would mechanically take a 3-year-old gave us quite a lot of comfort, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So we developed an extended rear facing, and how was it different from our current Minimac?
Okay, the first extended rear facing we did was very simply a little bit wider and a lot longer than the present one. And we actually crash tested and approved that in 2019.
Wow.
But we found in practical terms it was so long to accommodate them that you had to twist and articulate it to get it through the back door aperture of most cars, which wasn't very convenient at all.
I remember trying to get it in the back of the Volvo, which is a big car, and it was just so long. It was ridiculous, hitting the front seat, wasn't it?
It was. And so for our present Minimac, we designed it such that the length was the same as for our existing Minimac, and the extra length to accommodate bigger children was provided by a headrest, which simply extended up to the height which will take a child up to 4 years old, 105 centimetres.
So that's what we've done. We've made it slightly wider, and then with the whole issue of the head growing over the back of the seat, we've simply incorporated a headrest which will grow as they grow and will take them up to 4 years old.
Yep.
Which is brilliant. So the first one we did was longer, and as we realised didn't work in daily life, getting it in and out the car, because the Minimac is obviously designed to come in and out of the car. So this one we made, and it made a lot more sense, and we went to crash test it in, when was it? 'Cause it must have been just after COVID, was it?
No, it was before that. So we actually crash tested that in about 2020, and the problem, it all worked absolutely fine, but we had a stupid legislative problem, and this is what sort of hounded us throughout the life of the Multimac. We've made it, and it's structurally fantastic, and it gives excellent crash test performances, but legislation has prevented it being approved.
Can I just add there? So obviously it's the only multiple child seat of its kind, and all the rules are based around single child seats. Why wouldn't they be? So we often found that we were sort of exempt for a lot of things. So we really had to fight for the first few years to get the Multimac to market. And in fact, it took 13 years because it is the only one of its kind. So here we were, we'd been selling successfully for 10, 12, 14 years. And all of a sudden we're hit with another problem, the legislation, which again is all based around single child seats. So the rules were changing, and this was a bit of a worry for us, wasn't it? Well, not
so much a worry, it was a hurdle.
Yeah.
So we were approved originally to ECE 4404, and then this new regulation R129 came in. And the R129A introduced rear-facing seats, which had to take children up to a minimum of 15 months, not 9 months. And so obviously we had an awful lot of customers saying, why aren't you approved to R129? And the reason we're not was not our fault at all. It is that along with changing the rules, they also changed the test dummies. So the anthropomorphic dummies, which used to have 4 sensors, now had 33 sensors.
Yeah.
They cost a huge amount of money. And as most test houses only ever tested single child seats, they only needed one of each size. And so they only bought one of each size because they were incredibly expensive. And we needed 4. So it was legislation that delayed Multimac being approved.
Now, for most people listening to this, they'll have no idea what a crash test looks like. So can you tell us a bit about the setting, what happens, and a bit about the science behind the crash testing of a child seat?
Yes, okay. So there is a standardized crash test rig in all the European countries which do crash testing. So a bit like an MOT for your car, you can take it and get approval anywhere, and it's the same standard. So the crash test rig is designed for standard single child seats, and it's actually a seat which is 800 millimeters wide, and it has a lap and diagonal belt this way and one this way, and ice fix points. And it goes down the track on rails, and you attach your child seat to this seat in the same way as you would in a regular car. The chair goes down the rails at 30 miles an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, and then it is stopped, not dead, but there are different methods. But in our case, they use steel bars, and as the nose at the front of the child's seat rig hits the bars, so they bend and give you a controlled deformation. And this controlled deformation actually stops the sled in about 62 centimeters, and it generates 30 G, which is quite a high force.
Which is huge, isn't it? So in comparison, what sort of forces would, a Formula One driver, and if anyone has tried to drive a Formula One car, they will realise the forces are unbelievable. And that's about 5 or 6 G, isn't it?
The regular going around corners and braking, yes, 5 or 6 G. So you see Formula One drivers have huge
strong necks. Yeah.
Strong necks. But so this is a one-off crash. And as I say, it generates 30 G. And out of interest, the crash testing for adult seatbelts only generates 20 G, so that it was probably a different committee who came up with those rules. Anyway, you generate 30 G, and the dummy's head is allowed to move just 550 millimeters, which is not a lot if you consider it's probably pivoting from the hips. And the chest decelerations also have to be less than 55 G. Because if you actually stop dead, all your internal organs would move forward, and you probably die that way. Anyway, so they are the rules. And if you think that a regular single seat child seat is sized for a certain size child, so like typically 0 to 15 months, or 15 months to 3 years, or 3 to 6, or 6 to 12. So for this crash test, you have one certain mass range, and it's got to satisfy those rules. And with a Multimac, you could have one newborn in it weighing 5 kilograms, or you could have 4 12-year-olds weighing a total of 144 kilograms. So, one of those is whatever it is, 30 times as much as the other.
Huge variation.
Huge variation. And it's still got to work. So you would think if we made it soft enough to work for a baby, it would be too soft for the 12-year-olds. It will move too far. And if you made it stiff enough for the 4 12-year-olds, then the newborn baby would be killed to death because of the sudden shock. So the only way we can make it work is by having energy absorbing features built in. And the most prominent of those is actually the legs, which you'll see out the front there. And those legs are designed to bend and absorb energy in a crash. So as an aside, we started off our crash testing with BSI in England, and I used the crash testing to develop the seat. And eventually, on the 7th crash, the 7th design iteration, we passed the test. And they said, we can't give you a crash certificate because you've modified the test rig. And I said, how have I modified the test rig? And they said, you fitted a floor. obviously I said, well, every car I've been in has had a flaw.
Yeah.
And they said, well, in this 100-page document, it says nothing about a flaw, so we can't give you an approval. So I said to them, why didn't you tell me about this 2 years and £50,000 ago?
Wow.
And they said, well, actually, we never thought you'd make it work. So I said, who's your boss? And they told me VCA, and got nowhere with them. And who's your boss? Department of Transport. Went to Westminster, spoke to people. And the upshot of it all is that no one was prepared to take the responsibility of giving us an approval for something which was outside the strict regulations. So we ended up in front of the European Parliament, who said, this was 2 years later, we think this is a very worthy invention. We'd like you to continue testing for approval, and we'd like you to do it in Sweden, which is known internationally as the home of child safety. They invented rear-facing seats, they invented ISOFIX, they invented the Swedish Plus test, so they really are the gold standard. So we went to Sweden and they said, wow, we think this is good, we'd like to work with you. So that's where we then went on from there. So the Swedes were very serious, and we had to do, every time we made a modification to the seat, we had to do 11 crash tests.
And how much does a crash test cost?
A crash test then cost about £1,000, and it now costs about £1,500, and you, of course, destroy a seat every time.
Which costs about £1,500, £2,000 as well.
So it's pretty expensive. So
we started testing in Sweden, and that was roughly, what year was that?
2003, and we finally got our approval in 2008, just in time for a world economic crisis.
Talk about timing. So we were approved to ECE 4404 then. Here we are, testing our rear-facing seats years later, and all of a sudden we hear that this new approval is coming in, R129, and we had to obviously be approved to it before we could do any modifications to our current seats. We couldn't actually test our extended rear-facing seat and have it approved until we were approved to R129.
That's right. So a bit more background is that the reason the rules change is that progressively new standards are brought in, or tougher standards are brought in. And this is all discussed by what's known as the European Crash Test Committee, where members from various countries, interested members like from the test houses, from the governments, from the manufacturers meet and decide what's going to happen going forwards. And as I mentioned, the Brits wouldn't give us an approval, and the Swedes did. They're rather more cited than that, and our crash test results are always fantastic anyway. And having gotten approval, then Tommy Pettersson of the VTI was sitting on this crash test committee. So every time they proposed something that would not fit in with Multimac, then he would object and get it all sorted out.
He was like our cheerleader batting for us, wasn't he?
Cheerleader batting for us, indeed. And that was all absolutely fine. And then COVID came, and Tommy, anyway, reached that age where he retired. And so these committee meetings continued. And instead of going to each country for a meeting, they all happened on Zoom. And we were told in 2022, oh, by the way, R129 is going to be compulsory from summer 2023. EC 4404 seats will no longer be accepted, and we don't see how you can pass these new rules. So that was a bit of a...
So it's like here we were again with legislation getting in the way of us.
Bit of a hammer blow, really, because we'd spent a huge amount of money. We got these customers all around the world, and here we are. We know technically we are safer than any other seat because our energy absorbing features, and we were being
almost told to close up shop, weren't we?
Because the rules.
So it's a very long document, isn't it? 200-page document.
That's right. That sort of proves the development, because when we first started with British standards, the rule book was 100 pages, and now it's 200. So
doubled.
more and more of it. We then got another logistical problem. So all the people who written to us or written on blogs to say, why is Multimac not approved to R129? You know, it can't be safe. We have told you that when the new legislation was brought in, then they also brought in new dummies. And these dummies had 33 sensors instead of 4. They tested and measured far more components. far more parameters. And of course, for a regular test house, testing regular child seats, you just need one of each size. And they're very expensive, these new dummies. So we obviously needed 4 to test the Multimac. Indeed, I didn't mention that when we first got our approval in 2008, in order to get that approval, the Swedes only had 2 12-year-old dummies, and we had to rent 2 in from another country to do it. These sort of logistical things people don't know about. So we had a big problem there, and the deadline there was an intermediate deadline of August 2022, which we had to pass. Swedes didn't have any dummies. And again, just a bit more of an insight. If we were doing the crash testing in England, the crash testing would be done by BSI or some other test house. They would write the report. The report would be submitted to our Department of Transport, and the Department of Transport would give the approval. In Sweden, the test house was VTI in Linköping, and the governing body was the Swedish National Road Administration, who actually gave us our approval. So we pretty well had to do our testing in Sweden because already that conduit of knowledge existed. And in fact, the Swedish National Road Administration have always been very supportive of Multimac, and they were phoning up VTI saying, look, have you approved Multimac yet? We want to get it approved. Problem is, VTI didn't have enough dummies, and we were going to miss this deadline. So I checked around and found that the Dutch test house, TAS, had some, but we couldn't do the testing there because the Dutch...
We had no relationship with them. They'd never heard of us.
They'd never heard of us, and nor had the Dutch National Road Administration. So there wasn't enough time for all that to happen. So fortuitously, I managed to get the Dutch to agree to rent us their test facility while they were on holiday, and again managed to get Tommy Petterson to come out of retirement.
We drafted him in.
to come, and we did all our testing in Holland. And then the results were sent to the Swedish National Road Administration. And
what a brilliant thing of Tommy to have done, because, I mean, he was retired. How long were we? We were there for the best part of a week, weren't we?
We were.
And he came out to Holland. He was there every day. We went out for dinner with him in the evenings. It was just really lovely. And he did all that for us because he's a great guy, and he's been with Multimac since day dot.
Since the beginning. Well, originally someone had to stick their neck out, and it was him.
And it's him. Yeah. Amazing. What a guy.
It is very, very rewarding to think that the Swedes as a whole are very much invested in Multimac.
Absolutely.
And feel some ownership to it.
What better people.
Helped us. Indeed. Yeah. The Thomas Turnbull was known as the father of child safety.
Yeah.
And so that's how we managed to get our approval.
We still did it with the Swedish Road Administration.
We did.
But simply rented out the facilities in Holland, who had the appropriate dummies and so on. Because I think the approval was delayed to September 2024, wasn't it? And I think we did that in August 2024. So we just made it. And despite all the, doing the actual physical crash testing, there was a lot of admin to do, wasn't there? We had to update all of our manuals, update all of our photographs. There was a huge amount of work done. And I know we've done a video before in the past about what we actually changed on the Multimac. There wasn't that much that we had to change in terms of design, was there?
No, indeed not. And in fact, the crash testing was done with 4 dummies, which basically represent the whole range of a child from 0 to 15 months, up to 3 years, up to 6 years, and up to 12 years. And with these new anthropomorphic, enjoy saying this, dummies with 33 sensors, one of the things which they tested, which they didn't before, was during a crash, the dummy flings forward and then bounces back. And they now measure the force when the head hits the child seat. And we never measured this before. And when we did this crash test, you've got to be below 80 G, or you can be above 80 G for 3 milliseconds, which is, virtually nothing. And our dummies all passed, apart from the 6-year-old, and that had a force above ATG for 3.1 milliseconds. You're
Can't
allowed
believe
3
it.
milliseconds. We were 3.1
Just
milliseconds.
crazy.
And in order to reduce that, we have to use some very expensive Swedish energy-absorbing foam, which astonishingly costs an extra £150 per Multimac.
Just to put some foam in the back of the squat.
Just for that
and the headrest.
small eventuality.
Yeah.
So that was
A very, very expensive lesson.
very expensive.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
indeed.
And I mean, it is the same foam that they use in Formula One.
It's what they use in the I can't remember the name of the
The halo.
No, not the halo, the bit of cockpits around it.
So a very small, really, in the grand scheme of things, a very small design change, but a very, very expensive sort of experience to get us there, wasn't it?
Yep.
So anyway, so we finally got the R129 approval.
We
so
did.
Then we're thinking, great, now let's go back to our ERF, which we've been sort of raring to go at, you know. So what happened? Were we just waiting a long time for a test date, for a date to rent out the laboratory?
Well, going back further, we'd actually tested this extended rear facing seat back in 2020.
Oh, the longer one.
No, the new one with the headrest, and passed, but we were not allowed an approval because when they bring out a new regulation like R129, you are no longer allowed to approve things to the original specification.
Make changes or add things onto the old spec.
And so we could not test and approve our extended ERF on a 4404 seat. And so we had the extended rear facing Minimac all ready to go, but we couldn't crash test it until we had an R129 seat to test it on.
Yeah.
So we were very keen to do that, but these test houses are very busy and they don't just crash test child seats, they crash test all sorts of things in the automotive sphere. And one of the things Swedes are really good at is crash barriers. You see crash barriers down motorways and other roads, and there's various different types, and they're constantly being developed at VTI. One of the European countries had a tip-off from their intelligence that there was about to be a terrorist attack on one of their palaces, and VTI were charged with designing a discrete crash barrier which would withstand a 36-ton lorry. And this was obviously quite important and for quite an important customer. So while they were doing that, child seat development testing just stopped. So we had to wait till that was all finished before we could go and test.
And that was months and months and months.
That was many months. So very frustrating. Anyway, we finally got our approval.
Was it
April last year?
Yeah, and then it's all been about putting it into production, hasn't it? Because it's one thing testing it, but then you've actually got to make it and, you know, make it in bulk. So, yeah, it's been about finding... well, I suppose we've used all the same suppliers, haven't we?
We use the same suppliers, but tool making, for example, you want a tool and sometimes you've got to wait 6 or 8 months for it, and then you've got to get the test pieces, then you've got to prove them and modify as necessary. So it has taken an awful long time. But we're about ready to launch in the next month or so. Yeah.
And so it will fit into the standard Multimac seat berth, so there's no worry there. Can we still get 4 side by side like we could in the original Minimac?
Well, 2 things. First of all, it will fit all Multimacs. So even if you've got a Multimac from day one, then this seat will fit in it.
So the new ERF Minimac will still fit in the Multimac as it is at the moment, so it's still completely compatible with older models. It will take children up to 4 years old with this new headrest, which, as we were talking about earlier, the baby's head over the back of the seat. This combats that problem because as it grows over the back, they just keep moving the headrest up. And actually, that headrest, the mechanism, didn't you buy an old Morgan car seat off eBay to look at the way they've done it? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, okay. So we wanted an extending headrest, and extending headrests exist in other seats as well. But you always click them up a button. So click, 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 different sides. And why did I want to do this? I wanted one that was infinitely adjustable. So you just put it up to what level you wanted, and it would just stop there. So I was thinking about that, and a colleague, Martin, said to me, in the olden days, MGBs and Austin Allegros had headrests that you just lifted up. They just stopped in position. So, how did they do that? So I bought an old MGB seat on eBay and took it to bits and found very simply there was a bit of spring steel within some nylon tubing, and that's what gripped it. However, a normal car headrest is virtually vertical, and if you have a crash, there's no great force on it. It tends to move forward, whereas we had a completely different requirement in as much as the seat is reclined and it's facing backwards. So in a crash, the force on the headrest itself would tend to pull it out, and therefore we needed far more friction than a regular headrest. So having looked at the MGB headrest, we redesigned it with 2 friction pieces in a cassette, which could bolt on the back of the Minimac. And then we thought, how do we test this? How many cycles must it endure before it becomes floppy and useless?
So you've got to work out how often a parent might move that headrest up and down in its lifespan.
So I think we arrived at 9,000, which is a bit bonkers. But if you design 9,000 by 4, that's 2,000 a year.
2,000, yeah.
Which is 40 times a week, which is a bit bonkers. So if you're going to use it for 2 children, it's 20 times a week, which is 3 times a day. So might you move it 3 times? I don't know. Anyway, we made a test rig, and it just kept on recycling this like that. And we hit 9,000, and it
just kept going, didn't it?
Kept going. Why not? So we kept going. And some weeks later, we hit 50,000. I thought, well, that's bound to be enough. So we did 50,000 cycles, took it off, and it worked perfectly.
We just had that thing under the mezzanine floor, didn't we? Pushing the headrest up and down, up and down. We just left it on every night.
So that's how that will all work.
Brilliant.
And there's another advantage. I don't know if we mentioned it before, but if you have an extended rear-facing seat, it tends to be much longer than a regular child seat. And with a lot of smaller cars, that means if you put it in the car, the front seat has to move forward to accommodate it. And generally speaking, that will be the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. So you get the position where you have your precious baby in the back, perfectly safely sitting rear-facing, and the parents sitting at the front with their nose up against the windscreen, not very safe at all.
Yeah.
And it's pretty uncomfortable sitting that far forward. So a side benefit, if you like, of the Multivac system is that you can, in our 3-seaters, actually fit the extended rear facing in the middle, extend the headrest, and the whole lot can actually protrude between the 2 front seats. So you can have the front seats in a normal position, and you've got the added bonus. You can see your baby here, look after it.
Yeah, that is very good, because that's a massive problem. Whenever you see cars with extended rear-facing seats and, they've got a big leg, it's so much easier in a bigger car, isn't it? Because they do stick forward so much and really protrude into the space that the front seats have. So being able to put the Minimac in the middle and clear both front seats is a massive benefit. Can you tell us a bit about when you designed the first ever Minimac? Because you designed the Multimac first, didn't you? Or, as 4 forward-facing seats. And then when did you design the Minimac?
Okay, we proved it all worked with 4 forward-facing children. Obviously, before you buy a Multimac, generally, the reason you buy it is because you're having a new baby, so it had to sit rear-facing. And I thought, I don't want to design a rear-facing seat. I'll buy one. And I bought 12 from a German company, which had all been approved to EC 4404 as was. So, and I made a base which actually locked into the Multimac in exactly the same way as the present Minimac does, and simply attached this rear-facing seat to the base. And the seat had been approved to take child 0+, so up to 18 months. So we did our first crash test in Sweden with a 9-month-old, 9 kilograms, not 11 kilograms, so well within the limits. We did a crash test and the harness burst and the baby dummy flung out and hit the wall and did quite a bit of damage there.
Wow.
So,
and that was a German supplier.
It was. So I assumed that maybe our loading in the multimac, because the multimac is so secure, to put a bigger load on this seat than if it were attached to a seatbelt. So I then figured, well, I'll have to make my own. So how do you make your own? Well, the main requirement of the multimac is that each berth is kind of independent, and obviously people have twins and triplets, so the minimacs should sit within the confines of one berth, so you can have 2 or 3 or 4 next to each other. And we all obviously also needed the width internally the same as a regular child seat, because children are the same width. And so the only way we could do that is by making it out of metal, aluminium, which was fine. We're happy with aluminium, energy absorbing. Whereas the reason the multimac exists is that regular child seats have to be so wide because they're made out of plastics, and the only way you can get the strength in the plastic is have big,
make it so big
cross section to do that. So we had to make it out of aluminium, and we're going to crash test it. And as an aside, when you're making one-offs and dealing with suppliers who are making prototypes, everything is always late. And we've also previously mentioned the cost. So in order to crash test it, you got to crash test 2 or 3 or 4 just to prove it all works. And in order to test it, you got to put it in a multimac, which you got to destroy. It's very, very expensive. So we got a date in Sweden. I sent about 10 multimacs over there. And I sent half a dozen of the minimac frames, but the guys who were making the covers hadn't made them in time. So I kept one minimac frame back so that I could check the covers fitted. And then I got all the covers made. And on the day, I flew out there to do the crash test. And there used to be a very convenient flight from Stansted to Stockholm Skavsta, which is very close to Linköping, where the test house was. So you could actually do it all in a day. But it inevitably means an early start. So there I was at about 5 o'clock on a cold morning with a suitcase with my clothes and a lot of minimac covers and my briefcase and a minimac. And as I was waiting for the bus came, and I remember there was a Cockney bus driver, and he said, "Hello, mate, is that a baby seat?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, that's nice. I haven't seen one that nice before." He didn't have to say that, did he? It's wonderful.
That's a good sign.
I then went to check in with Ryanair, as you know, who charge you for breathing. So I presented my suitcase, and my briefcase was cabin baggage. They measured that. Then I said, "I've got a baby cradle." And they said, "Oh, that's fine. That goes free. Just go over to the fragile baggage." So they hadn't noticed that I didn't have a baby. So I thought, that's good. I'm winning here. And we got to Sweden and went there. The rig was all set up for me. We put a 9-month-old, 9-kilogram baby in the minimac and did the crash test. Now, the crash test in those days, the instrumentation was a bit older than it is now. And you had to wait after the crash. You saw what happened in the crash, but then you had to wait for all the data to come down. And from the
control room.
The control room. And the control guy was Ulf, who was about 2 meters tall Swede, who had an absolutely impassive face when he'd come down and just hand over
the results.
The results. You just couldn't read it. But because this was quite interesting, and our previous test with the German seat had smashed one of their dummies, there was quite a lot of interest and people were watching. And Ulf passed the results to Ilva, who was the project manager, and Ilva said, "Wow." And Tommy, who was there, Tommy Pettersson, who doesn't like you to get carried away with your self-importance or whatever, said, "What, 30? Because we mentioned you're allowed 55G, and most child seats will be about 50G, and a really good one might be 35G. But as far as Tommy was concerned, 30G was impossible."
Yeah.
So he said, "What, 30? And Ilva said, "No, 27.
Wow.
Tommy said, "Well, the instrumentation must be wrong. We've got to do it again."
Oh, my gosh.
And so we took another Mini Mac and another multi-Mac and had another expensive crash, and the results were exactly the same.
27G again.
27G. So it's quite
Amazing.
remarkable. And then because I was on a bit of a high, I said, okay, let's do it again and let's put a 3-year-old in it.
Yeah.
So we put a 3-year-old in, and obviously it wasn't designed for 3-year-olds. A 3-year-old, something like that, but physically fitted. And we did the crash test, and we got about 30G with that
Wow.
one. So the Mini Mac's always performed exceptionally well. If you look at what you're allowed in terms of the head displacement and the chest deceleration and multiply one by the other, we use about 50% of what you're allowed. And then with this 3-year-old in it, we used about 55% of what you're allowed. So we know structurally it's absolutely
sound, yeah,
absolutely found.
Yeah. And then was it easy enough to put the Mini Mac into production? Because I suppose we still used the same Kempston metalwork supplier.
Yes, yes.
And then you just had to find a polystyrene supplier for the insert. Harnesses, use the same harness supplier as the multi-Mac. But the cover, so an awkward cover, isn't it, on the Mini Mac?
Very awkward to make. But yes, I think the cover costs us about as much as a regular child seat costs. Yeah, but it's tailored and it fits properly. Whereas a general rear-facing child seat cover is a bit like a shower cap. Yeah. It's elasticated and fits where it touches.
Clings on, yeah.
Another interesting thing about the Mini Mac was, as I mentioned earlier, I made it at exactly the prescribed angle in the legislation, so it performed very well. And a number of customers said it was too upright. And we actually, one of our early customers was a pair of pediatricians who had twins, and they were very happy with it. But there was such a onslaught of criticism from people saying it was too upright that we then made one 10 degrees more reclined. And the Swedes said, you shouldn't do this. You should bring these mothers here. They should see a crash test. They don't understand. But the more reclined one gave virtually the same crash test results as the more upright one.
Yeah.
And customers were happier. So that's what has continued. And in fact, we've got the same angle on this extended rear facing.
And isn't it the same angle as the Volvo rear-facing child seats?
Yes, the Volvo and BMW seats were the same angle as ours. Yeah.
I mean, would you say slightly more upright is actually better in terms of safety because they've almost got more behind them, heat against in a crash, whereas if you're lying back, surely your body kind of slides upwards a bit.
Absolutely. So because you have to get the thing approved, you focus on safety, but parents focus on comfort.
Yeah.
And, to some, I mean, in reality, how many people do you know, touch wood here, who've had a bad car crash?
Yeah, very few.
It's like having a fire extinguisher in the kitchen. It's there just in case, but really you hope it'll never actually happen. So the crash test bit, you could argue, is incredibly expensive for the number of times it's used.
And unrealistic, really.
Being that tough.
Yeah. So it's a fine line, really, to try and keep your customers happy with the comfort and convenience, but then knowing that it's as safe as it can be.
Yes. Anyway, we do know from customer feedback that babies fall asleep in it and they're perfectly happy. So,
it's win-win, isn't it?
It's win-win.
Very safe, very convenient, very comfortable. Before you designed the Mini Mac, did you have to do a lot of research to sort of understand the forces? Because obviously rear-facing and the whole science and physics behind crashing is completely different. So was that difficult for you to do? How did you go about that?
Well, I'm an engineer and I love maths, so calculations are a doddle.
Yeah.
It's absolutely no problem. The thing is, as Tommy told me when I first went to Sweden, you can't calculate anything in crash tests.
Yeah.
You will always be surprised.
Yeah.
And you are surprised. So others younger than I would say, you should have some software done. You should simulate it or whatever. Yeah. But the cost, like you do with cars, to design a car, you don't just build a car. You do all the counts behind. But the cost of getting a software genius to do some one-off software for a child seat would be pretty prohibitive anyway. And when you've done it, you've still got to crash one physically to prove it. So I'm a sort of old school engineer, and I think I'll just crash it, see what bends, make it different, keep going that way.
From there.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Well, and luckily you crashed in. It was perfect. Better than you could have imagined, probably.
It was better than we could have imagined, yeah.
So that is why it took us so long to bring our extended rear-facing Mini Mac to market. But here we are, the second part of 2026, and it will be on the market. We haven't firmed up a price yet, have we? But that will be to come. So keep an eye on our newsletters, our websites, and blogs online. And we will be confirming timescales, price, and so on. But the good news is it's out. It is compatible with all multi-Macs, as our current Mini Mac. It will take your children up to 4 years old, which is brilliant. And you can still fit 2 next to each other for those families with twins, triplets, quads even. So join us again on our next Chat with Mac podcast.
And thanks for listening.
Thank you.